Welcome everyone, you're watching another episode of Conversations with Alanki. And in today's episode, I will be in conversation with an active legal practitioner in Australia having experience in over 3 different jurisdictions, Sri Lanka, Australia and Fiji. An admitted solicitor in the Supreme Court of Queensland and the High Court of Australia since the year 2000, President's Counsel in Sri Lanka, former judge of the High Court of Fiji and the former public trustee of Sri Lanka. Welcome to this conversation, Sanath Weeratne.
Thank you, Alanki. Thank you for having us.
Well, Mr. Weeratne, you're domiciled in Australia and as an active legal practitioner specialising in insurance, litigation and migration law, I thought the focus of today's conversation would be on the current migration program Australia has and what those migrating from Sri Lanka to Australia can really expect. Can you brief us a little bit about the Australian migration program? What are the current changes, any recent changes being made to the Australian migration program?
Yes. I think that's a very, very prudent question you're posing to me first up, particularly because when I see the amount of interest that is there at the moment in terms of people in Sri Lanka wanting to migrate, not necessarily probably to Australia alone, but anywhere. That is very, very relevant at the moment. I'm only competent as you know, to mention about Australia. In terms of the prospects which a prospective migrant has, it's very, very broad. Whether it's in relation to education or whether it's in relation to investment or whether it's in relation to employment. The systems are very, very wide and the opportunities are immense. So in relation to the system, how it works, it's very well structured. It depends as to, for example, a prospective migrant is looking in terms of placing his or her application within the migration program.
Right. Has the Australian migration program tightened up or relaxed in terms of giving more opportunities for potential immigrants?
Certainly hasn't tightened up. It has been relaxed over particularly the last 12 months, which is where the system has been restructured in a way that Australia is inviting more and more potential migrants to be looking at coming over there. So yes, it has definitely been relaxed, and Australia is welcoming, in particular, skilled migrants.
What is the reason for this change in the current migration policy?
The recent, I would say, mainly, Alanki, the best way to explain this is to bring out a comparison. So if you look at Sri Lanka is a island nation. Australia is a big continent. So the comparison statistically, geographically, Australia is 64 times larger than Sri Lanka, size-wise. And if you look at the population stats, we have got in Sri Lanka a population of something like 22.5 million people, roughly. Australia has got not that many more than what we have here in Sri Lanka. We have about 25.5 million people. So if you compare the stats in terms of the geographical landmass to the number of people, yes, Sri Lanka is very small size-wise, but Australia is a huge continent and most of the population is right around the country. So in the middle of the country, there's not much population. Hence the reason why Australia needs more people to come over, because it's a growing nation. And the country needs more skilled professionals, skilled labor in terms of getting the productivity of the country. So hence the reason why there is a huge attraction or a huge demand for skilled migrants.
And what are the main types of visa categories?
Broadly speaking, I would categorize it into 4 or 5 clusters. Firstly, probably the most, if you start from the the younger age category, that demographically, probably the students. So
Right.
the student visas could range from starting from an international student wanting to study for a PhD or a postgraduate degree, or a basic degree as an undergraduate, or even a tertiary or a TAFE qualification. So that system, that network flows right down the line in terms of the different subclusters of student visas. Then comes the skilled migration visas, and skilled migration is categorized in terms of the particular skill profession. It's called that demand skills categories. So there are about 88 different types of professions which are listed as being professions which have particular demand. So the skill migration category is one again, and then that is for independent skill migration. Then you have the business investment visas, which is where if you're ranging from a young person or a middle-aged person or a retiree, if you have sufficient resources, sufficient financial resources, you're able to look at the prospect of genuinely investing in Australia to start up a business which allows you to gain entry under that category of investor visas. Another broad category, I would say, Alanki, is for partner visas or spouse visas. It could be either for married people as husband and wife, or de facto. And then you have another category, which is the parent category, which is for aged parents. So broadly speaking, I would classify them as student visas, independent or skilled migration visas, and then you have the work visas. Work visas again is another category which is very popular. Generally speaking, again, because I like to keep it very simple without going into technicalities so that the general public understands, is a two-way process, which is where if I got a prospective employer, an organization or a company in Australia who is willing to sponsor a prospective employee, there are certain criteria which got to be met by that company. For example, they have to say that they are unable to find the particular person they're looking to employ in that organization locally, and they have to prove that by what's called the market testing, which is where they have to legitimately, genuinely make efforts to find the prospective employee in the local market, and that has failed. So the company gets approved as a sponsor, and then if that company gets one or two or more sponsorships approved, then what the company has to do then is to go and nominate a prospective employee who is the applicant. So that applicant's skills and experiences in the particular field will be assessed. So that's again another very popular type of visa, which is the work visa.
Right.
And then, as I mentioned before, it's the parent visa or the partner visas.
Right. And also a very interesting question. What can someone migrating to Australia really expect? What is life like in Australia? I mean, it's a totally new environment and a new system for the person migrating. What can they expect?
Endless things. Now, I can say that through experience, Alanki, because I've lived there for the last 23 years. If it's a young person who is looking at enhancing their educational opportunities in terms of degrees, postgraduate degrees, and university qualifications, the sky's the limit there. In terms of a person who is skilled, then there you go again. The opportunities are there to go up depending on your skill. And then again, if you look at as a nation, as a country, everybody's equal, and it's it's the culture. It is not at all a question of whom you know. It's all a question of what you know
Right.
and what you're capable of. And if you're the right candidate, if you know what you're doing, if you're capable of what you're doing, I think sky's the limit there. So in that sense, it's a land of opportunity.
And given that Australia is a popular migration destination, what prospects are available to the potential migrants to Australia?
Potential opportunities would be, again, to make life good in a general sense, in a broader sense, then to establish their professions, and more than anything else, Alanki, the lifestyle, the quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I might be seeing as a person who's biased because I'm domiciled there, but to be quite honest, I've lived in New Zealand, I've lived in Australia, and obviously this is my home country. I lived the first 30 years of my life in Sri Lanka, and this is always home to me. And then I worked in Fiji, so when I compare those 4 different nations, I think the opportunities are immense, because the quality of life is such that life is simple, it's not complicated. The structures, the systems are there from start to finish. So when you start your day, when you wake up in the morning, if you have 10 things in your list to do, that's the best way to explain this, I guess. If you've got 10 things to do, you can tick off 99% of the times 10 out of 10.
Right.
Because you know, you go there, you get it done. You know, you can time your trip. You know, if you go to if you're waiting for a bus at the bus stop, the bus comes sharp at 9:53. If the board says 9:53, the bus will be there 9:53. No excuses. Trains, the same. Public transport, the same. It's very rarely it doesn't work. It happens once in a blue moon. So in terms of little things like that, I think prospective migrants, for that matter, will find it a very secure, safe haven, because life is very structured, very simple, and if you know what you're doing, that's how the system operates. If you don't know what you're doing, that's a problem for you, but it's very transparent in that sense.
Can you give us an example of the systems in place in Australia which provides security to migrants? Because you were talking about systems right now.
There are quite a few.
Because I also think that parents who send their kids to Australia and who send their kids abroad in general are very concerned about their security and protection.
Yes. I'll touch on a couple of very basic ones first, Alanki. For example, if you're, this applies only for residents, not for student visa holders, obviously. If you are a resident, then you have a subsidiary which is given to you from the government for medical expenses, which is called Medicare. So that is where you don't foot the entire doctor's bill. So it's subsidized by the government, which is a huge bonus. And best example again is during the pandemic, the peak of the COVID pandemic in 2020, middle and beginning of 2021, there were benefits which are given to employees who lost their jobs, which is called the job seeker. So the government pays a certain amount for a fortnight for a person who has lost a job.
Right.
And for a person who is running an organization, struggling with time, struggling with the financial market at the time, the government gave a job keep allowance for the employer for keeping the employee on the payroll. So to that extent, the security is there in terms of the structures and the systems. And you might ask me how they do that. But it's a heavily taxed country, like in the most developed countries. You're taxed, and everybody pays their tax. So because of the income they generate from the taxes, then the federal government is able to provide the facilities what they're providing at the moment in terms of social securities. So those are the basic couple that I can mention, but also in particular in relation to what you were querying me, for students, I spent a few weeks here on the current stay at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a couple of articles in the papers, Alanki, for example, the child abuse. There was a recent couple of articles which appeared in the newspapers.
Yeah.
When it comes to which is a very sensitive area for parents, child abuse, child sex abuse, or institutional historic sex abuse claims, there is a very structured process. For example, if a child has been abused sexually or physically, it's never brushed under the carpet. There is no limitation period. You have a system in place in Australia where you can, yes, pursue a claim for criminal charges against the perpetrator. Plus, there is a regime in place for the victim to be compensated. So, and it was further enhanced in 2018, very recently, where they had a royal commission where they further structured the system better. So, whether it's a child who was abused in a private school, public school, whether it's in a religious institution, place of worship, or whether it's in a public office or prisons, police, still the victim, the child, is able to seek relief, redress, and compensation, irrespective of the timeline, irrespective of being statute barred, as we call it in legal terms. So you can bring a claim, and that claim system is beautifully structured, where things happen very fast, and they are able to put an end to it and be compensated financially as well. So that's a huge relief, I think, for parents who are potentially looking at sending their children over to study in Australia, who I'm guessing 99.9% of the times would also look at making life there thereafter, in terms of residence and etc.
And having lived in Australia and in Sri Lanka, how does the system in Australia compare to the system in Sri Lanka? Especially the system that you explained in terms of providing security and protection.
I think, to be honest, very advanced. Probably because it's a developed country, and the systems and the structures which have been in place, they don't just go up and down. They only just continue. They get better. They improve it. They amend it. But irrespective of any regime changes, the systems are continued, and particularly the child abuse matters. The system is so very well structured. It has taken up a huge leap forwards since introduction of the Royal Commission in 2018. So the systems are, I would say, without any doubt, I can put my hand on my heart and say it's very advanced. It's not that something that we cannot do here in Sri Lanka, but we need to keep the pace. We need to keep up the momentum. And I know it is there in Sri Lanka, but if you were to compare the two systems, I think we are still at a very infancy stage in Sri Lanka at the moment. But there's a lot of room for improvement.
Right, and right before this conversation, you were saying that there are many Sri Lankans who live in Australia.
Yes, interestingly so, actually.
What are the numbers like?
It's quite interesting that you brought the question up. I don't know whether how many of us know about this. Realistically, these are the stats which I am reading off from memory about 5 years ago. So it's probably changed now. It's got more. Australia, and in particular Melbourne, has the highest population density of Sri Lankans as a city outside Colombo.
All right.
So it beats UK, it beats Los Angeles. So there are about 600,000 Sri Lankans in Melbourne alone.
That's a lot.
It is a huge number. It's a big community of Sri Lankans. Population density wise, if you say Colombo, yes, Colombo is very dense. It's not saturated. So next to Colombo comes in other jurisdictions, Melbourne, where you get lots of Sri Lankans. And apart from Melbourne, yes, Brisbane, Sydney has lower numbers, probably 25,000 in Brisbane, or Queensland rather, which is the state. Brisbane is the capital. And Sydney has about a touch more than that. So there's a huge, huge community. But unfortunately, I might add this as well, we don't have a formal diplomatic presence there. That's one thing I would like to see happening for the Sri Lankan community there.
Indeed.
Because we have a huge presence. And
given the fact that there's a huge Sri Lankan presence in Australia.
Absolutely.
And there's no representation.
We haven't had that diplomatic position filled up lately for the last nearly couple of years. Yes, there is a huge demand for migrants, because I know for a fact personally, because when I did my research out of curiosity, I find that at the moment there are about 500 people who apply for passports a day, and the queue is a mile long. The immigration department here, they're doing a fantastic job to keep up the work to issue the passports, one-day services. And I'm saying all those 500 people a day are going to come to Australia. Some of them would. So the interest is there, as in Australia is not the only destination that people from Sri Lanka are wanting to migrate. They go to other different countries. But yes, we have a huge presence already, a big community. We have people who are interested to migrate still. Could be students, could be skilled labor, could be families. So I think a presence through the diplomatic channels would certainly be beneficial for both nations.
Indeed. I do think that's very important. Moving on to the final question, how has life been like? What has life been like for you in Australia?
For me personally?
Yes.
No complaints whatsoever.
What has your experience been like? I mean, I'm sure your experience could shed light to those watching and those who wish to migrate.
Me personally, Alanki, I've always been a professional in the legal field. And when I started off back in 99, I initially went and did my Master of Laws degree. And then since finishing my graduation, I sought admission as a barrister and then a solicitor. And ever since then, all I've done for a living up to now, which is all what I know to do, is to practice as a legal practitioner. My experience has been good. Looking back, I have no regrets at all. And my experience, both professionally and personally and socially, has been, I think, I've been blessed to say that it's been very pleasant. And I think, for that matter, as a growing nation, as a nation which attracts a lot of migrants, I think the same hope, the same faith, the same trust can be upon all migrants who are looking at moving over to Australia.
Right. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for shedding light on this topic. I do hope that those of you who are watching enjoyed this episode. I will be back with another episode, but before that, I'd like to thank Mr. Weeratne for his time and for sharing information with all of us. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Alanki. Thank you once again for having us.
Thank you for watching. I will be back with another episode. Until then, stay safe, God bless, and take care.